So I'd like to kick off, first of all, saying thank you for Tony for your time. Welcome to this actually first Tank Talks. The plan is to have monthly Tank Talks, and Captain of Industry Tony will kick off this one. I'm seeing myself moving up and down, Alex. I don't know what's going on there on the technology side. But it's clear that we're more professional in the tank storage industry, and luckily for us. So Tony, I want to kick off immediately with the first question. So welcome, Tony. We're going to talk immediately about the tank storage industry because that's the topic of today. And one of my first questions would be, what is the most upcoming trend that you could see that may reshape our sector? This is my first question. It's a big one.
Yeah, it is a big one. I think it probably also, first off, thank you very much, Fred, for inviting me to speak today and to be involved in this webinar. Your first of many, I hope. Your question is huge, and I think that the follow-up questions that we probably will get to will sort of be going down that same line, because whatever we say in this first section is going to get reiterated throughout the next 30 minutes or so. Look, we have the word transition is thrown about all over the place, but it's not necessarily about fuels. The transition of the storage industry is really, I think, what we want to talk about more today. The big one for us for the future is trying to navigate exactly where we end up with all of this stuff that's going on around us. With starting with IMO 2020 a few years ago, and sort of then we get into new fuels and new fuels for ships, which is obviously the big driver. Everyone thinks it's cars. It's not. It's nothing to do with cars. It's still powering the logistics of the world. And I think that what we have to think about in the storage sector is how we work out how our businesses not just survive, but actually succeed in what we do in the future. The big issues really is all about what we have to store. At the moment, we do have a very steady fossil fuel palette, if you like, around the world, which, for if you went a few years back, we were sort of the cursed dinosaurs of the industry. No one wanted to talk to us because we were dirty old oil men. And lo and behold, what we've seen is that everyone, including major investors now, are coming back to fossil fuels because they realize that it is going to be around for an awful long time to come. So the business of storage continues for an awful long time, but it has to be aware of the environmental concerns and the challenges that it needs to meet in the future. And that means, in terms of a terminal, not just what you store in those tanks, but how you store it, the efficiency of that terminal, the reliance on not just powering the terminal on straight electricity from coal-powered power stations, but looking at solar on roofs and all that sort of stuff. And that's that's not just the tip of it, really. Well, that is the tip of it, but there are other things that we can do to clean up our terminals, and that's sort of a very important thing, particularly in a world where the majority of the terminals in the world are actually pretty old. Terminals have an extremely long life. I mean, one of my first terminals I worked on in the UK was over 100 years old when I worked there, so it must be at least 200 years old now. In a sense, the challenge really is, we are governed by the people that store in our terminals. We cannot make a decision to build an LNG facility on our terminal, or a methanol tank for toxic methanol, or an ammonia facility on the basis of some hearsay. We have to have clients who tell us what they want to do and what they want to store in those tanks, and then we can go about it. So the independent storage, and I'm an independent storage guy, and that's what I've done for the last nearly 50 years. But in a sense, what I'm sort of saying here really is that we are governed really by the people around us, the customers that use our facilities, as to which direction we really go.
Okay, Tony, very very interesting. So indeed, there's a lot of follow-up questions on that point that you're just making. And one of my follow-up questions would be, how does innovation and technology will play or is playing a role in that trend?
Well,
from your
innovation,
perspective?
yeah, from our perspective, I think we've gone through the phases of making our operations efficient through good use of digital equipment, right? So in a sense, when I say digital equipment, I'm talking everything from control rooms that have become so efficient, in recent years, to mapping the electronics around the plant, to looking at the safety features on the terminal and how they're actually installed and controlled. I'm still just sidetracking. I'm still slightly in favour of the man that goes around and checks the valves, but these days we probably don't even need that because we have CCT on the valve, and we also have remote controlled SCADAs that can do all that sort of things. So in terms of technology and control, in like control rooms, then that's actually advanced already to a significant level. Moving forward from a terminal perspective, it's then understanding data. And you, Fred, know a lot about that. You're a great guy in the world of AI and things like that. And controlling data is very, very important to the efficiency of a terminal. So, for instance, if you're running a marine operation, you really should be looking at marine traffic, Kepler, Vortexa, all these guys, because that's really going to give you what's going on at the end of your pier. You can't do it by talking to Fred on the dock because he will only know what's coming in when he sees it. You have to be in advance of that. So, and that's good for your customers because you can then anticipate customers' movements, exit and import into the terminal, and so on and so forth. So in terms of transformation, really that's the first and key bit. The electronic and the data side of things is very important. It's something that storage really didn't see many years ago. We didn't look at that in the same way as we do today, but today it's vitally important.
So technologies, innovations do a great job. And what's great about these technologies, it gives us time to focus on new and maybe more important things nowadays. And one of them is sustainability, for example.
Yes.
How do you see companies in the tank storage industry coping with sustainability? Do they do a great job? Do you see more needs to be done on that? What's your take on sustainability within the tank storage sector?
Well, I suppose it's sort of a takeaway almost from my first couple of comments, but in a sense, the sustainability of the business, in real terms, sustainability is going to be there for a long time. In terms of making it sustainable in the 21st century, it's about how it makes itself work, how it actually provides the business that it actually delivers to customers. And it's not just about saving fuel and saving electricity and things like that. It's really about being, again, efficient, highly efficient in operations, in everything it does. So it has to work that way. In terms of the environmental sustainability, it depends again on the terminal, where it is and the age of the terminal. That makes a big difference. I mean, I am a director of a couple of terminals. One, which is the one behind me in Fujairah, is only 10 years old. So in terms of its presence and its future, it's going to have another 50 years of good life without anything really major going wrong with the facility. But then I'm also a director of a terminal that was built in 1982, and that terminal is a difficult one because we have stronger environmental challenges. This is in the Caribbean, by the way. We have stronger environmental challenges there than we probably do in Fujairah. So we have more environmental and sustainability pressures on an older terminal than we'd have on a new one. And the new ones in the Middle East, they've all been built mainly to European standards. They're all very highly run, very highly automated, whereas the older terminals are still catching up. And if you have a terminal that is 40 to 50 years old, you have real problems with infrastructure, struggling to keep infrastructure working and things like that. So the challenges are different depending on where you are around the world. It's probably a quick answer to that one.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I want to pick on one thing that you're saying, that you're a director for a few terminals, and you've been in the industry for a long time, captain of industry. Let's talk about leadership. Have you seen a shift in how you manage a terminal, how you lead a team on a terminal from, let's say, 10 years ago till today? Or what changes, and what are the qualities of a good leader in our industry?
Yeah. We've seen, and you've been part of this, of course, Fred, because you've been in the business as well for a while. And I think we've seen a lot of changes around the world in terminal ownership, and terminal ownership does have a reflection on leadership, a big one really. We've seen less and less of the private terminals, apart from a fact in the Middle East is probably one of the exceptions. But around the world, the biggest owner of tank farms now are PE funds, investment funds, and so on. So, that sort of leadership is different to the family leader. Family leadership used to be, if you like, it is like mum and dad and the kids. So the guys that worked at the terminal in those terminals were like the children, and they respected mum and dad at the top. Okay, that's a very simple analogy. When you are run by a PE firm, you have an awful lot of bean counters at the top. I'm sorry if there's any PE funds listening to this, but they understand what I'm saying. I respect my terminals are owned by those sort of funds, so I'm sort of knocking myself a little bit. But the interesting thing is that they would look at the numbers, and they, rather than look at the people and the people build, they would leave that to the terminal management. So if you don't have strong terminal management, then your whole business could fall apart. So, and we're finding, and we're both seeing this because you get involved in recruitment and things like that, we're seeing less and less good people come along to be able to run facilities. There's less and less people that want to come into our industry as well, which is quite sad, and that's because we've been darkened by the oily sort of paint of the last few years, and people saying, oh no, it's not an industry I want to come into. So the kids today, when they leave school, they really don't want to be in the oil industry. They want to do something much more interesting, like save the world. So what we see is that difference. Where two companies are making a difference is one that is still family owned, and that's, I'll say, Advario. Advario is a good example. So I used to work for this company many years ago. It used to be called Oil Tanking, as everyone knows. And Oil Tanking is still run by predominantly the Weiser family out of Hamburg. Third generation Weiser family, and they have actually made huge commitments in environmental presence and trying to deliver hydrogen projects and things that they can do that if you were owned by a fund you wouldn't do. So if I went to a fund owner and said I want 50 million to put in this new hydrogen tank and facility to store hydrogen for bunkering, they would say, well, where's the contract? And of course there wouldn't be a contract behind that. But some companies are getting around that. Vopak is another one. So Vopak is also, they are the two, predominantly the two leaders. I have put Exelon up there as well as another one in Europe. So, we have a different generation of terminal owners, but we still have the two traditional, I'll still say Oil Tanking, but I shouldn't do that anymore, but Advario, Vopak, I think sort of leading the pack. We now have Exelon, which people will know certainly in Spain as CLH, who are now becoming bigger than Vopak in Europe and that now run all the UK terminals, for instance. I'm seeing a lot of good environmental noises coming out of those guys and some good projects where they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. They're not greenwashing. Yep. So I think that's, it's an important part. So that, to give your leadership thing, I think the leadership, as it should do, starts at the top. And I think that what we have today is those two categories of, there's a little bit of the family ownership, there's a lot of financial ownership. Probably 75% of the world's terminals are financially owned now, as opposed to being family owned or privately owned. So it's a very different type of operation.
Yeah, great insights, Tony. And we talk about trends now again, and we talk about the next generation. So how do you see the industry move in the next 10 years? Do you see where will we be in 10 years from now? How do you see the terminal industry, tank storage industry?
Obviously, efficiency is the only thing we have to go for. We have to go for efficiency and great customer service. We never mentioned customer service yet, but that actually is the key and the key driver of your business. There might be 11 terminals in Fujairah, but if you've got one with a very good customer relationship, that will be the one everyone will call first. So that's the important thing, and that's what procures your next 10 years of business, because there are still people, not many, but there are still people out there that give 10-year contracts. And those are the sort of people you want to look after and keep in your portfolio for your business going forward. What I see is that we will be in 10 years' time still storing a very similar mix of products that we store today. There won't be a big change. We may have some tighter controls on emissions. We may have some tighter controls on product quality coming in, and we will have certainly more blending. And we will certainly see bio integration in a bigger way. At the moment, we've got a little bit of it. We've got the aviation, bio, as I call it, which is still quite small, right? Still 5% in fossil, so it's not big, but it's something. But I think that will get bigger as we go along. I think so. Those sort of things. I think more bio, same mix, but more blending.
Yeah. Okay, great. Talking about that shift, that change, not too much in terms of how we will be 10 years from now, but you talk about what makes a company more successful and which one doesn't. Talking about competition, how can companies position themselves in a better way to be more competitive? Would you have some tips for these companies?
Yeah, I just said it. Look after your customers. I mean, I think if you don't look after your customers, they don't come back. My view. I was talking to someone the other day, another commercial guy, actually in the US, and he says, I always want to walk into my customer's office and see him smile. So I said, well, doesn't that mean that, he's got a better deal than you think? And he says, no, I want to see him smile, and I want to smile back because I'm happy with the deal we have together. That customer service makes your terminal number 1 out of 10 terminals in your area because of that relationship. The fact that when someone picks up the phone, I want to talk to Fred's terminal. I don't want to talk to Tony's terminal because I know Fred will get the job done, and I know his ops team won't have a lineup problem. They won't stick the product in the wrong tank. They won't have a contamination. Those things make your mark. If you have, unfortunately, and I've worked at, every terminal has issues, right? I've worked at a terminal that's been perfect for 30 years, and they have one issue. Everyone remembers the issue. So, and it might not have been anything too significant, but people will remember it. People remember bad things, don't remember good things. Someone just made a comment on there we should make the business sexy again. I absolutely agree with that. Actually, I think it is Fred, but anyway, I'm a silly old fart these days, so no one listens to me. You're right.
Yeah. I one takeaway for sure. Who has the biggest smile here today? He will have his customers happy as well. So I think that's great. I like that. Customer centricity is a key word. It's not just a trendy word. It's really about how do you make your customers happy? Be customer centric, not just happy to be happy, but happiness is a good starting point. All right, to wake up in the morning, a big smile. Everybody smiles back, right? That's a good attitude. Exactly. Tony, I'd like to use the last few minutes, and then we maybe have some questions from the audience. We'll see. You have been so long in this industry. You have learned so many things. We continue learning every day as we do. But there are things that we learned, and I will never forget. And the older we get, we like to start sharing these lessons learned to the next generations. So, Tony, what are the lessons learned you would love to share to this audience and to all those who will follow us later on, also on the recording and so on? What are the lessons learned you'd like to share from your career?
Okay, so as we said earlier, I've been in this business coming up for my 46th year. Of course, I started when I was 3, Fred, but that's another matter. But what I'd like to remind people is that this business still is a people business. We're actually a small niche bunch of guys around the world. There's probably 10,000 people in our industry. There's not that many, right? So compared to car building or something like that. But what I always like to do from the early days, when I used to run the Castrol plant in UK, I had 175 people there. I would make sure I spoke to every one of those people at least once during the week. And I never usually missed anyone out. And I did the same all the other businesses I worked, I'm only mentioning that because I had the biggest employees, but everything else, I mean, I ran BP Chemicals and Mabanaft and a few other places as well, and they had smaller teams. But I always made sure that the people that worked for me were my friends. They were happy to work for me. They were happy to be part of the team, and we gave recognition. And if you do that with the people that work around you, then you will get that respect back. And that reflects on your customers, because the last thing you want is that they go out and they will talk to a customer and go, oh, that Tony, oh, what a nightmare, I can't stand working for him, because that's what will happen. But if you have that conducive teamwork going on, that is what, in my view, will lead your business forward. That then gives you the customer service. They come to you saying, if we did this, things will be better. If we did this, technology will work. Oh, look what I've just seen on the Kepler screen, or whatever it might be. That sort of thing is vitally important. To actually have that cohesive team and give them the recognition and give them empowerment, and that's how your terminal succeeds. This is very simplistic half-hour view, but it's we could come. I could talk about this all day.
It's a beautiful way to great, amazing. Tony, a few last words you want to share with the audience, this and the ones that will join us on recording, and then we will see if the audience has some questions. Tony, last few words I want to give you the podium.
It's an industry that has seen so many changes over the years. In fact, what's happened over the last few years have not been as significant as probably the 20 or 30 before, because this is a small industry. When oil trading started, and oil trading created the independent storage business, really. When oil trading started, incidentally, by the predecessors of Glencore in Israel, of all places, by pumping oil from Iran through to the Med, that's what started this. That was only like the late 60s. So the real oil trading really only started in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. It's not a very old business if you think about it. So, from that perspective, I want to remind people that we're still a young business, even though people think we're, dirty old dinosaur oil and all this sort of stuff. We've still got a 50-year process that we have to go through, and the excitement is still to come when we have new fuels, when we have new projects that we can do. Who knows what we're going to be doing? We might be building terminals on the moon in the next 20 years. We don't know that. Anything could happen, and this is the generation and the new generation that's going to make that happen. And I'm really excited to see how some of these things are actually coming together at the moment.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tony, for joining this first Tank Talks. And we'll open now the chat for the audience. If the audience has any questions, we have a few minutes left. Any questions from the audience? In the meantime, while we're waiting for a question, I see already one question from Mr. Thomas. This Tank Talks will happen every month, so we'll have every month new speakers. Tony is the one who kicked off on this one, so please subscribe to our newsletter and get in touch with us through the LinkedIn as well, so you're updated. So Thomas, what is your question? We can unmute. Yeah. I don't know. Can we unmute? I think we can unmute, right? Or is there a chat question? Alex, maybe you can assist. Yeah. Anybody? Okay. So Thomas, you can't hear me now, Thomas. We can't hear you. Maybe you want to text or type your question into the chat. That might be helpful as well.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. First of all, thanks to Tony for great discussion. Tony, I agree with it that customer service is important. By the way, I'm Thomas Simpson, CEO of Valor International Terminals. We have a facility in Hamria and one in Fujairah. Okay, so anyway, thanks, Tony. Customer service, yeah, very important. I agree, but valve lineups, in my opinion, valve lineups and things like the avoidance of any, cross-contamination of product, that can only come from operational excellence.
Yes.
And for me, that's not a customer service issue. That's an operational issue, and having interactive and watertight SOPs and work instructions that involve the workforce in the process and document it properly with times and proper identification of the routes of product, and just making sure that everyone's on the same page, because it involves guys in different locations, in the control room, in the field, and at the jetty. And therefore, in my opinion, really, really important to have these procedures, and everybody has a copy during the course of the operation, and they fill in real time what they do. Certainly principal steps. I'm not looking to micromanage the process, but certainly the principal steps. For me, it's good to have those documented and timed. I'd like your thoughts on that.
I totally agree with you, Thomas. I mean, I think I mentioned it briefly. I have a terminal in the Caribbean, which is very, very large. It's 2.8 million cubes, so it's a big one. Crude oil terminal, 94-meter draft. We have a huge marine operation. We have the biggest fuel oil operation in the Caribs. And my biggest issue is just exactly what you said. Lineups, right? Valve movements, watching the procedures, checking, walking the line. We make our guys walk the line. We have SCADAs that will tell them what's going on, but we don't want them to get lazy. I want them out there, like you do, I would imagine, walking that line. But, our line's up a volcano on one side, so it's not quite so nice. It's probably walking around Hamria, but, in real terms, I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, I'm a firm believer of the manual interface is stronger than a fully automated one. You have to double check everything because you can't get it wrong. And so I agree. And I think that is all part of the customer service thing. So you're absolutely right. Very important.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's a question from Gary. You can unmute yourself, I think. I think we need to put him as presenter. Let me do that. There we go. Yes, I think you can unmute yourself, Gary. You can speak.
Yeah. Thank you, Frederick and Tony. Great to hear the talk. My point is coming from not so much leadership, but I do think it fits in, or I hope it fits in the future of TankStorage. So, more on the technical operational excellence side, we developed robotics to do tank inspection and cleaning in service without emptying the tank. It's been around for a while. It's been evolving. It's still relatively young, but we've been doing it for over 20 years now, and we've got into over 700 tanks, and we are approved and have master service agreements with some of the large oil and gas companies. My question is for the terminal side, what can we do better, and what do we need to improve? If you're aware of the service, if you're aware of it, what can we do better, or where do we need to improve to get it more widely used in terminals?
So I'm looking where is Tony in the chat. he disappeared. I will ask my team, Urshel and Alex.
I can come back to this another time.
Yeah, okay. We will. There he is. Tony is back. Yes, Tony. So I don't know if you had the chance to hear the whole question.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. So I heard all of that, Gary. I mean, what you're asking really is, how do you commercially grow your business? And your business is, even though you've been doing it 20 years, is still recognized as sort of new technology, because most of the operations managers in the terminals are older than your business. So the biggest thing to overcome is the fear of new technology, right? And I think you'll agree with me. And I know how much, people have struggled over the years trying to put something innovative into terminals, like dissolving sludge in a tank before you clean it. There's chemicals out there that can do that, but, no one wants to take the risk because they want to contaminate their tank or whatever. So I've seen lots of new technologies that don't fail, but they just can't get themselves past that generation gap of old school knowledge. So it's back to where we were at the beginning of the call. It's sitting down with those guys, having a good presentation, and a bit like myself and Fred and other commercial people in this world would do. Take someone out for a beer. Maybe you can't do that quite so easily in the Middle East, but that's the best way to make someone a friend. Then they'll test your system. You may have to do something at a cheap price just to get in the door, but once someone sees a success, then he'll tell the operations manager next door, and he'll tell the guy next to him, and then it spreads. But it is difficult, and I know at the beginning, I mean, there's a couple of companies that do what you do. There's another one in Ireland that I know quite well as well, Regen, which is the same sort of thing. But it is very important to actually use your sort of technology now in that whole cleaning operation. I go back to the days with shovels and shoveling sludge out of crude tanks, and I actually did it myself once, long time ago. You stand there up to your knees in sludge. It's not very pleasant, but there are still a lot of people around the world that do that. So your technology is very important. It's very important to pursue it. You need good media coverage. There's a lot of good media companies out there that can really help you as well these days. Happy to talk about that offline if you want. So you could find me on LinkedIn pretty easy.
Tony, you have time for one last question, or you need to go? Are we good for one more last question?
Yeah, I'm okay.
So I have the next one in line is Alberto. I'll move him into the chat. So Alberto, please unmute yourself and share us your question. Yeah, we don't hear you. Let's check if your mic is on.
I can't hear him.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Well, going back to the example that Tony.
No, you're too far from your microphone. We don't hear you.
Yeah. Well, going back to the example that Tony explained about Exolum growing in Europe. Do you see some future next more business concentration in this business globally, or do you see more new companies coming to use part of not covered markets, or what you see there? I mean, because we have the example of as you mentioned also as Advario, that they adapted into the new strategy of and I think that all the companies are going through the same way. But they are still growing, all of them, Vopak, Advario, and so on, all growing. So, but apart of this, do you see more concentration in few companies in the next future, or do you see that there are room for standalone companies with only 1-2 terminals?
Thank you, Alberto. Sorry, you said in our region. What region are you? Sorry, so I know where you're coming from. Are you talking Spain?
In Europe.
Oh, in Europe. Okay. So, sorry, I wasn't sure which region because it's a pretty international call. Look, so the comment about Exolum, Advario, Vopak, those three are all very rich companies, right? So they've got lots of money, so they can afford to do things like develop new projects, and because they can throw money at it, right? So if I want to be sort of the non-financial guy that I am, it's a good way of actually not paying tax, right? Because you sort of spend your money on a project and you get something for the terminal without disclosing a huge profit at the end of the year. So it's a very good thing. For smaller terminals and smaller, I mean, let's take different types. So there could be an existing small terminal. How do you grow that? You have to have the land to grow, and you have to have good relationships with customers to grow. Because if you haven't got anyone behind you as a customer, it ain't going to happen. If you are in somewhere like the Middle East, you tend to have, for Jara, for instance, you would have sponsors. So the sponsors 10% of your company might be owned by, the local sheikh or whatever it might be. That tends to be the way that works. That gives you growth capital. Do I see new terminals in Europe? I don't see any reason to have new terminals in Europe, because I think Europe has got probably enough tankage to keep it going for the next 20 or so 30 years. In fact, if anything, it might have too much. One of the downsides is refineries, and there's been a lot of refinery closures. I mean, you look at Spain, for example, where you've had a lot of big refineries go, and they tried to turn them into tank farms, and that doesn't work, because you can't have a 100,000 sort of ton facility, a tank facility on gasoline. It doesn't work that way. So in the rest of Europe, in Northern Europe, I see a dominance of those three companies that I mentioned. Also, you've got Tepsa-Rubis, for instance. But you still have room for the smaller guys. So if we're looking at Spain, I always look at Decal. And Ignacio and his team there, which is a great terminal, but there are only 3 terminals, 4 terminals, but they seem to survive in this big world of finance-owned businesses. In Rotterdam, I don't see any reason to grow it out any further. I think it's got enough tankage, and the same for Amsterdam. Antwerp is more of a chemical port anyway, as you know. So, but again, there's still plenty of tankage there to mix out because of the recent builds they've had over the last 10 years with the growing out of Sea Tank and places like that. So do I see generally anything in Europe? Not really. I mean, at the moment, people are selling. So at the moment, this is not a trade secret, but you have what was the Unitank business, the Macquarie are moving at the moment. So there's terminals up for sale in Germany. But it's a difficult one because people are looking at the future of oil, and they look at it in the way that I mentioned, from 5 years ago, where they can't see where the fuel business is going. I can, but if you haven't got a terminal that's got growth potential in it, then I wouldn't buy it. So, and that's just from my perspective as sort of a terminal buyer and runner of operations. So I don't see growth, Alberto, in any big way in Europe, but I still see room for niche businesses. Whether that be in biofuels, which wasn't something that we would have done 20 years ago, but is now, because it's now coming into the mainstream business. In the old days, it was an excuse to sort of build a few more tanks, because by the time you built the tanks, the bio company had gone bust. Nowadays, that doesn't happen. Nowadays, what happens is there is a growth around bio, and I'm seeing that in my Caribbean terminal, and we're seeing it also in Fujairah for the first time, which is good. So I hope that sort of answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony.
Good, thank you very much. I know there's a few other questions coming up, but we are closing actually now soon the webinar. I think, Tony, also you have a flight to catch to Singapore later today. So first of all, thank you all for joining this. You can continue having questions. Also, we'll publish this webinar online, also through LinkedIn. We'll have a post where you can also ask your questions. Tony will see the questions. He will be tagged in the post. So maybe other questions can be asked, and we can see if possibly we can respond on them as well. This is the first Tank Talks. I would like to invite everybody to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn. You will be notified for upcoming new events on Tank Talks. We have very exciting speakers we'll announce very soon. And I'd like to invite you all. Last thing also, we have an amazing webinar workshop actually on ISGOT that is also coming up in November. Please subscribe to that if you feel that is interesting and important, which it is. Please join us on that one as well. It's a 3-day training camp driven by our experts at TankSkills. Thank you, Tony, for this participation. It was great to see you again. Hopefully somewhere next time in Philippines, Singapore, Bahrain, Fujairah. So look forward to see you also live. Hi to the wife and to the family. And thank you all for joining this webinar, and we look forward to see you again on our next Tank Talks. Thank you very much, everybody, and this will be published online for the recording if you want to see it again, and for those who didn't join yet, they can see the whole webinar published online very soon, later today. Thank you very much all. Yeah, thank you, and see you on the next Tank Talks. Bye.